Alright, so we're... Oh, I got it wrong, didn't I? There we go. Much better. Spider-Man Homecoming, and no, that is not a misnomer. He is back, baby. He is back with Marvel, and now he is one amongst the many in the MCU. In this 15th, it's a 15th movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it is the first one with Spidey, the way we now know him and see him, as brilliantly played by Tom Holland. This one was done in a joint venture with Sony, which was pretty momentous when you think about it, because Sony has been pretty clingy to Spider-Man, so much so that they did a second reboot series with Andrew Garfield. Now, whether or not that's a success, it was a success or not, well, we're here because that one didn't do well. So, you draw your own conclusions. Because they compromised, we have this now. Do you consider Tom Holland to be the quintessential Spider-Man? Well, I don't understand why we had to keep asking this question. I mean, he proved himself, with almost 20 minutes of screen time in Captain America Civil War. The real question was, when are we getting more? Well, we got more. He's the star this time, and you know what? He carries this film. He owns it in every single scene, right next to frickin' Robert Downey Jr., who's been Tony Stark now for 9 years. This film was directed by John Watts, who he himself, it's kind of an interesting gamble that Marvel had. It was a ballsy move on Marvel's part to give it in the hands of, frankly, an underdog director. But when you think about it, he's an underdog director directing an underdog superhero. Spidey has always been the underdog character. So there's nothing more appropriate than having a director who comes from a similar standing in the filmmaking community. The other outstanding thing is that this film had a vision. It had a beautiful vision. And it was so simple. It was a John Hughes high school movie, and that just so happened to have a superhero in it. And that's the brilliant thing about Marvel, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that's what I think really sets it apart, and what's always set it apart from all the other competition, is that whenever they make a movie, it is always a movie of a particular genre that just happens to have a superhero in it. Everyone can agree, Winter Soldier is a political thriller. Civil War has been labeled as a psychological drama. Heist movie. So it stands to reason that Spider-Man was going to be its own genre, and nothing's more perfect than high school. This film just lives and breathes the high school atmosphere with a certain authenticity, which I would definitely say comes from the fact that they cast actors who are the right age for a high school movie. Wonderful sense of authenticity that permeates all throughout in the camaraderie, not just with Peter Parker with his friend Ned, but with Liz Allen, with Michelle, even with Flash Thompson, and Tony Revolori. He played Zero in Grand Budapest Hotel, but I swear to God, I wanted to smack him every time I saw him. And the funny thing is, I couldn't begrudge the way he was written, because even though it was been 17 years since I've been in high school, I have met people like Flash Thompson who just seemed to live and breathe your misery, who wanted you to be miserable but seemed to fail in every respect just because he was doing it so forcefully and just so obnoxiously that people just said, leave him to his own devices, leave him to stew. So the first major success of this movie is that it is a fantastic high school movie. I would actually say it's a better high school movie than most other high school movies that are either on TV in any high school drama. This honestly felt more like a real high school, probably the best high school movie I've seen since the days of John Hughes. That's not the only reason this movie is a success. As a Spider-Man film, they finally got it right. I mean, I enjoyed most of the other movies. Even to an extent, I enjoyed Spider-Man 3, but there was always a weird balancing issue with it. The first set of movies with Tobey Maguire were much more doe-eyed, a bit more of a gee whiz kind of variety, whereas the Andrew Garfields were much more grounded. They were much more serious, and that's fine, but they never really were able to find that right balance of what makes Spider-Man such an endearing character. But here, they finally got it. On one side, yeah, he's awkward. He's not suave like all the other superheroes. But then when he's Spider-Man, that's where his confidence comes in. Whenever he's Peter Parker, he's clumsy. He's basically a terrible liar. The only secret he seems to be able to keep with any kind of dedication is the fact that he's Spider-Man, but even he can't do that right every now and then. But then when he's Spider-Man, he's on top of the world, and you could see that body language change. They got it. They just got that balance, and I'm kind of over the moon about it. Everyone knows Robert Downey Jr. was going to be in this one, and it's right because they set it up in Civil War that Tony Stark was going to be something of a mentor to Peter Parker, and people were worried that he was going to overshadow it. A lot of the poster ad campaign didn't do it any favors. But I'm here to tell you, not only is he in it just the right amount of time, he never overstays his welcome, and yet in the midst of it we actually get a lovely bit of character development, particularly at the very end. So you know what, he's not only is he here, he's not wasted, but he never overstays his welcome. One complaint that's always been lodged against the MCU movies is that the villains aren't that great. Personally, I disagree with that sentiment. Even they can't complain. This villain actually has, well, he has probably some of the most realistic motivations I think everyone can sympathize with. In this world, in this economy, even in times of desperation, we've seen people go to some pretty horrifying lengths just to survive, but not just for them to survive, but for their own family. I was very taken by it. Matter of fact, the film actually starts off focusing on his motivations. Now that the MCU has been so deeply established, we can actually go back to stuff, and this one starts off actually shortly after the Avengers, after the first Avengers movie. My God, this is where we're at now, where the movies have their own continuity, and it's pretty beautiful. We're introduced to our main villain, Adrian Toomes, aka the Vulture, played by Michael Keaton. What are you expecting me to do, a flying joke? No, I'm not doing the joke. Everyone else has done the joke. The tabloids did the joke at the minute he got cast. Michael Keaton just likes flying. The Vulture is, well, he's a very imposing villain. The first time you see him, he is imposing. But the thing that made him stand apart from a lot of other villains is the fact that he had levels. It was not just constantly intimidating all the time. There was a bit of humor about him. There was a fact that he felt blue collar, but there was a sense of the fact that he was doing this beyond just a level of greed, but for the fact of just staying afloat. When you actually get to know him a bit more, there is a twist at the end of, and we may have to get into spoiler territory, I apologize. We may. I'm going to try my best to restrain myself, but beware. There is a late third act twist which changes the dynamic completely, and in a great way, because it alters the way Peter sees him, and it alters the way Peter actually sees his commitment to being Spider-Man. Throughout the entire film, it seems that Peter just wants to prove himself that he's just as good as all the other Avengers, but he's, through the course of it, forgotten why it's so important that he's Spider-Man. And the arc is beautifully done, and at that moment you find out this revelation in the third act. This movie didn't just have the Vulture as a villain, it actually had special appearances from a lot of Spidey's Rogues Gallery. You had the Tinkerer, you also had the Shocker. 2 of them. Were there 2? I never thought another person would want to be the Shocker, let alone one person. We even got the Scorpion, which was kind of cool, but not in the final form as we now know him. So it was a nice variety. So Sony was able to still get in their niche of throwing in everything but the kitchen sink, but because Marvel was in full creative control this time, they actually served a purpose. It was fine. There's a lot of foreshadowing for later installments. Now, as with any Marvel movie, stay for the credits. If you're still watching by this point, I'm getting into spoilers, sorry. This one ends up with Toomes in prison. He's talking with Matt Gargan, the Scorpion, and they're obviously alluding to the fact that they're going to put a gang together to take down Spider-Man. But what's interesting is that at the end of it, Adrian Toomes does not give away Spider-Man's identity, which is another reason why he's definitely a lot more complex villain than we've had in a while. So credit where it's due. But what's interesting is that they allude to the fact that there's someone who's going to organize the group. Obviously, they're setting up the Sinister Six. It's like what they were trying to do in Amazing Spider-Man 2. They allude to someone who's going to be like their benefactor. Now, I'm going to get in some theory territory here. First off, the obvious one, Norman Osborn. You can't do Spider-Man and not bring up Norman Osborn. The one I'd like to think, particularly since it's all part of the MCU, And since he did voice interest in being in a Spider-Man movie as this character, and since he's in jail with them, what if the benefactor was the Kingpin? Wishful thinking, but it would be awesome. Comment, agree, that would be awesome. This film had me just going crazy over every single nook and cranny of it. The cast is great. I forgot to mention Marissa Tomei. I loved her in the brief time she's Aunt May in Civil War, but this time really getting to see the meat and bones of her Aunt May. She is probably now my new favorite Aunt May. As for the rest of the movie, it's the Spider-Man movie that I know a lot of people have been waiting on for a long time. I enjoyed all the prior Spider-Man films for all their particular reasons, but this one, well, where does it land? Stay tuned on Narcotic Casserole, and we will get into that in our next feature, Less to More. Final rating, Spider-Man Homecoming. This is the first. I'm giving Spider-Man Homecoming a perfect 5 servings. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Well, that's what the comment section is for. Where do you think Homecoming stands in the midst of all the other Spider-Man movies come before? Stay tuned here on Narcotic Casserole for our new feature, Less to More, where we're actually going to talk about that. Like, share, subscribe. That's simple.